Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at gcnlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@USAPrepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Everyone all set, cocked, locked. Here we go. Your dial is set correctly to USA Prepares. We're delighted you're in class with us. Blake is engineering the broadcast, and I'm chuckling because I was reliving the story about how the corrupt state of Missouri came after our family for unpaid sales taxes in the amount of $100,000 spread over 2 years. And I was telling them the story about, it was unfounded, it was all made up, and they decided that they were going to go after people to fill their coffers, so that they can continue getting this unjustified salaries for make work that they have in government offices. And what led to that? Well, by the way, we won that one. That was a lot of fun. And by the way, I was on medication at that time, steroids, and my doctor prescribed them, and I didn't want to take them, but man, they make you grumpy. And it was perfect timing to go after the corrupt state of Missouri. And why am I mentioning this? Well, headlines in the KansasCity.com website. Missouri Governor Eric Greitens resigns, ending a political career once aimed at presidency. God forbid that guy would have been president. Guineith Isaacs is with us live in Australia. Welcome, Guineith.
Hello, Vincent. How are you this morning?
Grumpy. I'm thinking about maybe grumpy is not the right word. I'm thinking about all these government thugs that allegedly are there to protect and serve and carry out the people's work. And here we've got a governor who stormed into the governor's office, so this website says, vowing to clean up a government he said was corrupt. And here's the guy that was buried in an avalanche of scandal and felony charges, misusing campaign funds, misusing campaign donors lists, misusing funds, misusing all kinds of things this guy was involved in. And he's secretive. He's a former Navy SEAL. And it says that he had an affair with a woman in 2015, allegedly. And he took nude photo of her without her consent and used it to blackmail her to keep her from talking about their relationship. The guy's married. He's got a family. He's one of these guys that had presidential ambitions. And he allegedly forced her into oral sex. I mean, this guy, if this is all true, good riddance. Good riddance. So, we talked about the corrupt state of Missouri. And I was telling Blake, our engineer today, that a little bit about, my story with the corrupt state of Missouri coming after us allegedly for unpaid sales tax in the amount of $100,000, which is totally fallacious. And, at 8%, you have to sell like $1 million worth of stuff, in state to owe. Yeah. So
where would you get $1 million worth of cows?
Yeah. Yeah. So
Do they have any idea what $1 million worth of cattle looks like?
First of all, these we're talking about government types, right? They don't know much about anything. Yeah, I believe, and this is going to make some people very angry, but this is not something I just came up with. I believe this back in the 70s, that the government employs people to keep them off the street. How about that? A lot of government jobs are just to keep people off the street, because they wouldn't be able to find a job if they didn't have a government job. Who would hire them? And what would you hire them for? I mean, just here goes some of our broadcast class. They're turning off the radios right now and their computers, because I really think that you really have to be pretty bright, and you really have to be determined, and you really have to have some drive and motivation to be successful in many positions in private business today. And I think those who don't have that drive can get government jobs. What do you think? You think that's far-fetched?
Well, not really. Given that, from what I've seen of government workers, they seem to have an IQ of somewhere between 80 and 100. But they seem to think that they have an elevated view of who they are as human beings, as if they walk around on a little gold cloud, and the rest of us have to more or less kiss their angel dust. And they have no idea that all these wonderful people that work around them are actually totally hated by everybody outside of their office.
Yeah, and if you get a chance to get in an elevator, in one of those office buildings where these government employees work, and you listen to them, having idle chat in the elevator, where they're away from their desk, okay, away from what do they talk about? They talk about other people who they despise, who they work with, and Sally's getting ahead, and it's not fair. And they talk about little stuff, little meaningless stuff, and where they had donuts the last time they had donuts, where they were, and how great they were. Really, people in my world don't even talk about that kind of stuff. We don't have time to talk about that stuff. It doesn't enter our thought process about these silly discussions. We talk about more important things, like getting the job done, whatever it might happen to be. And Guineith, that was something I wanted to mention today. I got a couple emails asking me to discuss a specific topic, and that is automotive type thing. So I just wanted to share to address that. I want to talk about a product that I use, and this is not a commercial. The last time I bought this product was about 15 to 20 years ago. It's called Copper Coat, C-O-P-P-E-R, Coat, 2 words. It comes in an 8-ounce little jar, plastic jar, has a brush and a cap. And you unscrew the cap and it has this little brush. And really what it is, it's copper dust and oil. And it's a very fine copper dust, about the consistency of ground white flour. So it now costs about $15. I paid about $8 for it 15 or 20 years ago. And I use it for, like if I take out spark plugs and I put new spark plugs in, I will coat the threads very lightly with this copper coat. And that will allow me to remove the spark plugs later. They won't get seized or rusted in place. Okay? And so nuts and bolts that I plan on taking out, I will put a little bit of copper coat on the threads that, where the nut and bolt join. So that's the kind of thing I do. And I also use it on, and I'm going to be very careful when I say this, I even use it on wheel bolts and lug nuts for automotive wheels. Now, you have to be extremely careful when you do this, because copper coat will prevent the nuts and bolts from sticking together or rusting together. That also means that they can come apart more easily, which also means that if you use them on your wheels, your lug nuts can come off if you don't put them on properly. So what I'm going to tell you is, if you want to do this, make sure you use a torque wrench, torque it to the specifications that are indicated by your manufacturer. And if you do it, your lug nuts will last a lot longer, and your wheel studs will last a lot longer, and you'll be able to take them off a lot easier. Okay, but you want to make sure that you don't do it in such a way that your lug nuts are going to come off while you're traveling down the road. So if you decide to do that at your own risk. I'm not telling you to do it. I'm just saying that I do it. And I have for a very long time, decades. Probably I've lubricated with grease lug nuts on wheels since the 1960s. But you've got to be very, very careful because you can do it in such a way that the lug nuts will come off. So use a torque wrench and torque in a star pattern, which means you don't go around in a circle. Let's say you're going to torque to 100 pounds of torque total on the wheels, and you'd start with maybe 20 pounds. And you go one lug nut, and then you go diagonally across to the opposite side of the axle. And then you keep going opposite side. And then ultimately when you'd go with, let's say, we'll start with 20 pounds, then the next round will be 40 pounds, then 60 pounds, then 80 pounds, then 100 pounds. Then when you get to 100 pounds, you ultimately go around in a circle and make sure that you've torqued them all to the same amount. And I do that twice. I go around that final circle twice to make sure that they're torqued correctly. So you can get your torque wrench at Harbor Freight, about $20 on sale. And I talked about copper coat. Have you ever used copper coat, Guineith?
I've never used copper coat or anything like it, but it sounds like an excellent product.
Well, it's just simply copper dust and oil.
Yep. There is a product out there that kind of does the reverse of copper coat, and it's called Loctite.
Yeah, that's exactly the opposite.
My dad was a big Loctite fan. he was, I think I mentioned he was a master engineer, and he always had a tube of Loctite, and it was often in his pocket.
Okay, class Loctite,
he would
LOC.
never be without it. There's also an unlocker for Loctite that you can get, so that if you've got a nut that was Loctited in the past, you can just squirt some of this unlocker for the Loctite onto the nut, and you'll be able to get the nut off a lot easier if you ever have to in the future. I don't know if people were aware of that.
No, I wasn't. I used a hot wrench, which is called a torch. We'll be right back.
That'll work.
Yeah. Guineith Isaacs is with us live in Australia, and she mentioned the product Loctite, Loctite. This is not a commercial either, and this is a product that has a very low viscosity, and it's an acrylic compound. And what it does is it will seal or lock the threads of, let's say, a nut and a bolt, or whatever you're screwing a bolt into. It'll prevent, or an Allen set screw. If you don't want it to back out or come loose, you use Loctite, and it will make it more difficult for that fastener to come loose. Now, the problem is if you want to later on loosen it, it's more difficult. And so you said there is a compound that's an unlocker, which is pretty cool. I've just used I didn't know about that, so I just used what's called a hot wrench, which really means an acetylene torch. I just heat it up, and it kind of melts and lowers or increases the willingness for it to unlock. That's what I do. But that's really interesting, Guineith, and I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yeah, it's just something I remembered, because I remembered him pulling out this tube of Loctite and then the tube of unlocker as well. I can't remember what the unlocker is called, but it is actually made by the Loctite company, because
and it's
this problem is going to occur from time to time. Yeah,
and it's a worldwide product.
Yeah, what you were saying about governments. I'm just so over them going over our crooked toenails and, or inventing crooked toenails. And when they are, as guilty as sin and belong in the ninth circle, basically. I found a book at the bookstore last time I was in town, and it was called Dante's Inferno. So we've been gradually we've had for the last few nights Dante's Inferno as our book reading. And something, because I read books and I read them out loud to my son, and if you read something like Dante's Inferno, it's actually a really, this might sound strange, but it's a really, really comforting read, because you realize that all of these evil people who are doing all this really, really bad stuff are not going to get away with it.
It's a comforting thought.
It is a comforting thought to realize that, and to see that there's all these appropriate punishments that are going to go out to all these people who have made our lives hell, and there seems to be no justice on the earth. And then you read Dante's Inferno and you realize that there is a God in heaven and that he is good. And that if they don't change their ways, that they've got something waiting for them on the other side.
And here's an illustration of the problem. So let's say you live in a small village. And in this small village, most people know who's who. And most people know the troublemakers. So you've got a family of troublemakers. And let's say one of the family gets a job in a minimum wage job at let's say a gas station, and the local gas station. And this person's miserable and grumpy, and boy, you just don't want to be near this person. And you think, this person tells you off, cusses and swears, and berates the management and hates his or her job. And it's just miserable to be around. And you think, you know what? I can call the owner and say, I just want to let you know that I don't like going to your gas station. And I don't like going there anymore because you've hired this person who's just miserable. And going in there ruins my day. So I'm not going there anymore. Now, let's say that miserable person gets fired. And now what happens? So now you've got this miserable person with nothing but time on his or her hands to make trouble. More trouble. At least when the person has the job, they're confined for 8 hours a day to doing less mischief, right? That's the problem. The problem is we look at that and we go, what is the lesser of the evils here? Well, let's let this person be miserable in this job and we'll get our gas someplace else. That's the problem. We don't speak up. We'll be right back. Hey, Guineith, in Australia, do they have these, convenience stores or gas stations that used to have a compressor inside with an air hose, and if you needed air to inflate your tires, you just pulled up there and you cranked in the amount of pressure that you wanted, and used the air hose and inflated your tires, and when you were done, you just bring the hose and wind it back up, and it was free. Did they have that in Australia?
Yeah, many places still do. But often you have to get the nozzle off the attendant and then return the nozzle to the attendant at the end of it, because there's been a thing of people stealing the nozzles.
No. Okay.
Believe it or not.
We have improved that in the United States. What we've done is we've decided that air is not free. And these convenience stores and gas stations charge for air. And
wow.
Just a quick story to tell you how bad I think it is. So there's a locally owned independent convenience store / gas station. So you can get your diesel, you can get your gas. If you want to get something to eat, maybe a hot dog or something, they've got them, or snacks and sodas and things like that. Well, I traveled our gravel road, and I realized that my truck wasn't handling right. So I looked, and my tire was going flat. what happened was I picked up a stone and it put a hole in my tire. And so I got it to this convenience store 11 miles from our farm. And I went to get air, and they had an air machine. And this was after they closed. And it was 4 quarters to get air. So I put the 4 quarters. I had 4 quarters. And I put the quarters in there, and the machine fires up, and it gave me half the amount of air that I needed. And I was kind of frosted. I had a patch kit with me, and I patched it and sealed the leak with a patch plug. And all I needed was air. And I put my dollar in there, which I thought was outrageous. This was many years ago. And it gave me half the amount of air I needed. So I ended up, doing the long process, which was taking the spare out of the truck and then changing the tire with the spare. And I got, everything was fine after that. So the next time I passed this convenience store gas station, I went in and I said to the person behind the counter, do you know that it takes 4 quarters to get air out of your machine? They said, yeah. I said, do you know that when you put 4 quarters in, that you get about half the amount of air that you need to inflate your tire? They said, yeah. So, okay. Well, since you know that, I'm never coming back here. Ever. And I've never been back.
Yep.
And I try to only get ripped off one time. Second time, I try to prevent that. And that's the kind of nonsense that's going on in our country. Like, how much can we get out of people? Let's set this air machine so that it won't inflate a tire completely. And most of the people drive trucks around here. I'm talking about pickup trucks. They take more air than these little, motorized shoeboxes. These smart cars with these little tiny tires. So they've engineered it so you can't get enough air. And they know it. And I think $2 to inflate a tire is way over the top. That's the kind of stuff that's going on. I believe that companies are trying to figure out where the point is where the customers are going to go ballistic, and they just go like 1 degree less. 1 degree less. But pretty soon, we're going to go ballistic. And we're going to lose our tempers. And I think it's going to happen. I really do. I think, I went to the John Deere store yesterday. I needed a drain plug for a hay mower because we're going to be doing hay. And the problem is that the drain plug is on the bottom of this hay mower. So I called up the dealer. I said, hey, I've got a John Deere 270 hay mower, and do you have the drain plug for that? And the guy didn't say, let me look, didn't confirm the information I gave him, just put the phone down. Came back a couple minutes later, and he said, yeah, I got one. I said, okay, can I have the number of the part and, come in and pick it up. And so I went in, and he said, you want the gasket to go with that? That's the little copper washer. It's the size, a little smaller than a penny, and it's like a penny hollowed out. Little copper washer. And so he writes down $8 and something for the drain plug. He writes down $4.11 for the copper washer. And I'm thinking, this copper washer should be about 4 cents. But he probably made a mistake, and he made it 41 cents. And I don't know what the extra one is, because he wrote 411. I said, that's not the price, right? He goes, oh, yeah, that's the price. I said, for this washer? He goes, yeah, it's copper. I said, I've got pennies that are made out of copper. And there's more material in the penny, like 9 times more material in the penny than in this copper washer. And so he said, basically tough. And I'm thinking, here's John Deere, and what they're doing is they are taking advantage of their customers, because where else am I going to go to get this proprietary type washer? So I decided to find the manager. I found the manager, and he said, who are you looking for? And I said, I'm looking for the boss. And he said, how can I help you? So I took this washer, I had it between my thumb and my forefinger, and he was sitting down at his desk. I put it on his desk. I said, be really careful with this. This is a John Deere original part. Be really careful. I put this little washer on his desk, and he looked at me like, this guy's nuts. And I said, so how much do you think this costs? He goes, I don't know. I said, well, you're the boss, right? And you should know this. And he said, I don't know, $1.97. I said, well, it'd be really expensive at $1.97, but you guys charge more than twice as much for this. He goes, yeah, that's real expensive. And he said, but you know what? I think Walmart's expensive. And I said, you do? He said, yeah. He said, I don't buy yogurt at Walmart. And I said, okay. I said, but you're the only guys that sell green yogurt. Now, John Deere is green. I mean, that's known as the Green Tractor Company, right? And he looked at me like, you know what? We got you. We don't negotiate. If you want it, buy it. If you don't want it, don't buy it. That's John Deere. John Deere is absolutely taking advantage of their customers. They are. Because when you want parts, they've got you by the throat. And I told him, I said, you've got me by the throat. And I let him know I wasn't happy. Now, I could blow up that relationship. I could make it worse. But they've got me by the throat. And how much do they have me by the throat? Well, this particular dealership owns all the John Deere franchises for like 200 miles. They've got me by the throat. So what do? And it's not just them. It's all these big companies. If you look at Comcast, the cable company, you start out with $29.99. Pretty soon it's over $100. Dish, same thing. Telephone, same thing. Cell phone, same thing. All these companies that entice you. Hey, it's only $19.95. That's for the first year. Then they've got you by the throat. Are they doing that in Australia too?
It's like this. You can't go around and move and do anything in Victoria without breaking some law or other. The Premier of the state has so filled the place with red tape that it's just absolutely crushing the economy. And it's really, really tragic to see. Oh, but if you're a Muslim, then you get a free pass. And you can do just about anything you like. And, it's creating a lot of resentment among a lot of people, especially in Melbourne, but also elsewhere, because these people, these Muslims, they go around in gangs, and they do crimes, they smash stuff, they abduct children, they do all sorts of things, and yet somehow for them that's okay. But if we've got a crooked toenail, then we get sent to the wall.
I think you hit the nail right on the head. I think that the reason that things are so expensive, or one of the reasons, is because of the red tape and the regulations that the government corporation puts private corporations through. And it's so onerous. For example, I know a guy who had an independent dealership, and he sold tractors. And he was in a small city of, let's say, 15,000 people. The government corporation came over to him. This was like maybe 25 years ago. They said, you're power washing these tractors and putting them on your front lot for sale, and you're cleaning them up and making them look good. You're shining them up. But, when you power wash them, grease comes off them and oils, and it goes down the sewer. So you can't do that anymore. You have to put in a catchment system. And it cost him $25,000 to put in a catchment system on his own property that he owned, because they claim that ultimately, if it rained, the oils would somehow get into the sewer system and cause a city problem. So they made him do this. That's the kind of stuff they do. And I have another friend who owned an appliance store, appliance/furniture store, and people would come and they'd park in his paved parking lot. It was black asphalt, and they would stop, pull head in, and a drop of oil would come out of the engine, drip down, and successive cars, drip, 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 drip. They made him dig up his parking lot at the cost of, $25,000, and replace these drip marks, because the drippings from his customers' cars and vehicles would run into the sewer system. That's the kind of stuff that's going on. And it's getting expensive.
It's disgusting. It's really, really disgusting, because like around here, you've got 25% unemployment, and if you want to get a business going, you're going to be hammered by the municipality because the municipality wants their cut.
They do. We'll be right back. Guineith Isaacs. You know, Guineith, we have a radio station near us in Missouri, and it's KLID, AM 1340 in Poplar Bluff, Missouri. And one of the owners of KLID is a wonderful lady, and her name is Sonny Skidmore. Now, Sonny has had some documentation tracing her lineage back to Richard the Lionheart. And she was wondering if you knew anything about the Skidmores and Richard the Lionheart, or Richard the Lion, Richard the First.
Okay, now, Richard the Lionheart was a very, very interesting guy. He wasn't actually English at all. He was Norman French, okay? And he, in French, his name is Richard Coeur de Lion, which means Richard with the heart of a lion. So Richard the Lionheart in English. He was a really, really interesting guy. He was probably one of the best kings that England ever had. Unfortunately, he had a bit of a mongrel brother, who, whereas Richard was one of the best kings that England ever had, his brother was one of the worst kings that England ever had, and his brother was King John. You know, Richard the Lionheart, he was fond of going on crusades, and he was the archetypical, knight in shining armor, who was also a king. And, but when he went away on the crusades, he left his brother in charge of his kingdom as Prince Regent. Okay? And then, one day, Richard, he didn't want to go on, he got kind of fed up with going on crusades, but he still wanted to go to war. And so he went across to France, and he was busy laying siege to a particular city in France. And a boy shot a crossbow at random, and the crossbow bolt went up into the air and came down and pierced a gap in Richard the Lionheart's armor and killed him. And Richard the Lionheart was famous for his chivalry, and he said, do not execute the lad for his sins. And then he died. But unfortunately for the boy, the people around him weren't so sympathetic or chivalrous, and the boy was summarily executed for killing the king, admittedly. But the thing about Richard the Lionheart is he was a French man, and the French have had this cultural tradition going back a long, long time, and French men tend to marry, and they have a wife, and then they have a girlfriend, and then they have maybe a second and a third girlfriend. And they look after them all very, very well, and it's just something that's accepted in French culture. So, but it often has meant that there has been a string of what we in English would call illegitimate children. And I think that Sonny Skidmore, if she descended from Richard the Lionheart, that it's likely that one of her female ancestors was one of Richard the Lionheart's girlfriends.
Interesting story.
So,
And,
yeah.
And Sunny, I'm sure, is going to call me and let me know what she thinks. She finds the information that you provide absolutely fascinating. So fascinating that she has USA Prepares running delayed prime time in the afternoon during drive time, the number one time slot on KLID. Thank you so much, Sunny Skidmore.
Oh, that's
We'll be
great.
right. Yeah. And she'll be learning about this afternoon. Everyone all set, cocked, locked. Hour number 2 of USA Prepares. And you are listening to, although she won't admit it publicly, Sunny Skidmore's favorite radio broadcast, USA Prepares. And we're talking about Richard the Lion. Gwyneth, do you have any other thoughts that you'd like to share about Richard the Lion? Yep. Gwyneth, you there? Gwyneth, I can hear you breathing, but I can't hear your voice. So, why can't I hear Gwyneth Isaac's voice? Yeah, I can hear her. Gwyneth, can you hear me? Are you on mute? Yep. Hey, Gwyneth. Okay. All right. In the meantime, we're going to see if we can fix this technical difficulty. And can tell you a little bit more about this lubrication of metal parts that I've been doing for decades. And I want you to be very, very careful if you decide to do this. So I use copper coat, as I mentioned in hour number 1, copper coat. It's like copper dust mixed with oil, and it comes in a prepackaged jar, plastic jar. And it has a brush, kind of a stiff brush, probably like horsehair, on the end of a little rod in the metal cap. And you can take out a little bit, and you can put on threads of devices that you want to assemble. Now, what would that be? Well, in my case, we have a lot of equipment that has spark plugs, and we inspect the spark plugs for maximum efficiency pretty often. So we take out the spark plugs, and, there's a limited number of times that an aluminum cylinder head will accept the tightening of spark plugs in the aluminum threads. Eventually, they wear out. So I want to lubricate them, and I want to make sure that the spark plugs go in easily and they come out easily, and I don't damage the cylinder heads. Because, if it's a lawnmower, you're talking several $100s to repair that. If you're talking about an engine, you're talking a couple $1,000s to repair that. So when it comes time to change the spark plugs, I apply copper coat to the threads and the sealing gasket surface of the spark plugs. And I'm very careful not to get the copper coat on the electrode or the insulator, the ceramic insulator, when I screw the spark plugs in. And here's an interesting note, that if you torque a spark plug without any lubrication on the threads, it will go in with less torque applied to that spark plug, even though the torque is the same, because of the friction on the threads and the friction on the gasket, spark plug gasket. So you're actually going to be tightening your spark plug greater, even with the same torque applied, if you use a lubricant and or copper coat. So that's what I do. I use copper coat, or sometimes I'll just use high temperature red, fully synthetic grease. So for nuts and bolts that I want to take apart later on, because it's a regular maintenance item that I'm working on, I will put a synthetic lubricant on those threads. And I'll tighten up the nut or the bolt, to the appropriate torque. Now, it will make it easier to remove, and in some cases, there's a risk that if it comes apart, damage can be done, or if it comes apart, like in the case of wheel lug nuts, the lug nuts can loosen and the wheel can come flying off as you're going down the highway. So I want to caution people, do not take this as advice as to what to do. I'm just telling you what I do. I've been doing it for years, but if you decide that you want to apply a grease or copper coat to your lug nuts or your wheel bolts. I want you to know that no manufacturer I've ever read about says do that. So I've never seen anything that Ford says as to do that, or Chrysler, or General Motors. As a matter of fact, they say don't do that. And I think that's the lawyers talking. And for sure, your lug nuts will stay on your wheels much better if you do not use a grease or copper coat. But I use a copper coat or a grease because I want to make sure I don't wear out the threads. Because we keep our vehicles 300, 400,000 miles. We rotate our tires often. And they are not, those aluminum wheels are not designed for constant taking them off and putting them on. They wear out. The mating surfaces will wear out. As a matter of fact, there are some high-performance cars, these few $100,000 cars, these supercars made by, let's say, a Lamborghini, if you will, that the tires will last maybe 12,000 miles, and the wheels will last 2 changes, and then the wheels are to be discarded because they're unsafe to be retorqued. So to prevent all that, so to prevent all that, what I do is I lubricate the threads. And I was just recapping what we talked about in the beginning of hour number 1 while we're trying to get you. I'm so glad you're back. Gwyneth, is there anything else you wanted to say about Richard?
It's really late. I actually just dropped off to sleep. It's really, really late. I'm terribly sorry, everybody. But I just, just dropped out. So, but I'm back again now. So my apologies to everybody in the class.
We could hear you breathing. We could hear you breathing. And for some reason, I thought maybe you were unable to hear us. And but anyway, I'm so glad you're back. Is there anything else that you wanted to share with us about Richard the First, Richard the Lion? Well,
when you've got a position of responsibility, like if you have a farm or if you have some sort of a business or that, and there's, you think that you have the opportunity to go off and do fun stuff like going and laying siege to cities or doing crusades or whatever. It's really important to stay on the farm rather than going off and doing all the fun stuff, because the farm is your first responsibility. And ultimately, with Richard the Lionheart, England was his farm, okay? And England really suffered deeply because he went off to go on crusades and, jaunts to Jerusalem and laying siege to this city and that city and the other city and all the rest of it, because he had his brother, who was Prince John, and then after Richard the Lionheart died, he actually didn't have a legitimate heir, okay? Although, like I said, he obviously had concubines and he had girlfriends, and they had children, but none of them was, he didn't have a legitimate heir. His wife didn't have a child, and so Prince John became King John. And there's been a very good reason why England has never had another king by the name of John, because the first one was so bad. I think that if anyone by the name of John ever did become the King of England, that he would more or less have to change his name, because, King John taxed people so much that it was just, that it drove them broke. And
isn't that where
it would crash the economy?
Isn't that where Robin Hood came in?
Yes. Robin Hood apparently was a character of fiction that was done by traveling theatre troops. You know, but the thing is, with King John, that he taxed the people so heavily that there was no economy left. And it's a very, very similar situation to what it is today. And actually, the bishops and the nobles got together and they said, listen, we've got to do something about this guy. So they wrote up a particular document and they said, listen, we have got this document here and you've got two choices. We can kill you, or you can sign this document and sign it into law. And, you know, like most bullies, King John ultimately was a coward, and he signed the document and signed it into English law, and that document was the Magna Carta. And that was the origins of the Magna Carta. And one of the first things that's written in the Magna Carta is, first of all, that the British Crown should not mandate any particular religion as being the state religion. And another big theme of the Magna Carta is that the government shall no longer have the right to levy taxes. So that makes all taxation thoroughly extortionate and illegitimate. That under the Magna Carta, the governments are not allowed to raise taxes.
When we come back, can we talk about Tommy Robinson and your T-shirts?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, we'll be right back. Guineith Isaacs is with us, live in Australia. So, Guineith, do you have any more information that you wanted to share about, you know, the taxation and what's going on in the Magna Carta?
Okay. It's really, really important for people to break out of this brainwashing that taxes are just something that has to happen. Because, up until, the Great Depression, there was no income taxes. You know, government ran for, the vast majority of history without there being any income tax at all. And taxation was always regarded as being, even by governments themselves, as being something that was absolutely thoroughly undesirable. Okay? And, that people used to sit in Parliament as a kind of a philanthropic gesture, and there was generally not a big fat parliamentary salary. If there was a salary, it was modest. It was something where it was sort of like a token of gratitude rather than the reason why you went in there. And you didn't go and sit in Parliament unless you were independently wealthy. You know, if you were independently wealthy, it meant that you had enough brains to go and build that wealth, which meant that you were actually a good steward, so that when it came time to sit in Parliament, you were actually sitting there to be a steward of the nation, okay, to help to run all the things that ought to be done by governments. Like, for instance, we need to have some sort of a restraint on wickedness out there. We don't need a bunch of extortionists sitting by the side of a highway, looking for broken taillights. We don't need that. What we need is for, officers of the law to go and do things like, arrest pedophiles and bandits and murderers and all this sort of stuff. And, that's supposed to be the purpose of government. Okay?
Yeah. And a couple weeks ago, Guineith, you were on the air with us, and I talked about the royal fleecing. This wedding, this outrageously expensive wedding. And I said, so what's going on? And you said, and I'm paraphrasing, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe you said, well, there's something big going on, and this is to cover it up.
Yes,
and now,
say that. And it's all come out now.
Yeah.
That
hit the nail right on the head. Tommy Robinson.
They were stalking him. It's come out. They were stalking Tommy Robinson, just waiting for him to put a toenail out of place.
Mm-hmm.
And he
what did he do?
Stood outside of court with his cameraman,
who's Tommy?
Filming, and happened to mention that in the courtroom that there was a pedophile grooming trial going on. And something? It's oh my gosh. They pounced. They absolutely did. They pulled him into a star chamber, which is one judge, no hope under heaven of a fair trial, and they whacked him away just as fast as they could. And I had no idea what the something big going down would be. But this was obviously it, Tommy Robinson.
When we come back,
Guineith, we're just waiting to pounce on him.
When we come back, please tell us who Tommy Robinson is and what he was doing and why this is such a big scandal. Guineith Isaacs is with us live in Australia. In 1982, Stephen Christopher Yaxley Lennon was born. He is known under the pseudonym of Tommy Robinson. He's an activist. He's currently serving a 13-month prison sentence for contempt of court. He's a anti-Muslim activist, and he was secretly jailed in prison. And from my understanding, he was arrested for disrupting a trial last week and was sentenced the same day to 13 months in prison. And the judge ordered news media to not report on it. It was a gag order. Is that what happened, Guineith?
Yeah, more or less. And, there's film out there on the internet of him getting arrested, and it seems to me the only ones who were disturbing the police, that the peace were the police, He's basically there with his cameraman standing outside a court. And, you go to any courthouse in a major metropolitan center during business hours, and the chances are you're going to come across some film crew or other filming outside that court. That's just how things go. And he was there with his cameraman and, filming, and he happened to mention, there's a, trial of a pedophile grooming gang going on inside this courtroom now, and this was on a live stream, and, this paddy wagon full of police pulls up, and they basically, to cut a long story short, bundle him into the back, and he said something like, I'm going away for a long time, and, to tell everybody. Basically, that was the gist of what he was saying. And, they must have just been waiting around the corner for him to go and put a foot wrong. They must have just been waiting to pounce on him.
And you think this is the scandal? This is the scandal that
this is exactly what they planned, this rush royal wedding, to go and have everybody standing on the street corners going, "Yay, yay, yay, royalty!"
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned the camera crew filming, outside the courthouse. Well, that happens during daylight hours, I guess, most of the time. However, filming 24 hours a day is the government filming people on the street 24 hours a day.
Us.
Right. And it seems like that's okay because, it's okay, it's the government. But when we do it, it seems like it's not okay.
Yeah, it's
interesting.
It's just absolutely disgusting, And oh my gosh, if you go into the background of what that poor guy went through, I fully understand. I went through something similar when I was in Geraldton. I was a stay-at-home mum, and at that time I had an investment that was bringing in a bit of income, and it enabled me to stay at home. And little did I know when I moved into that house that there was a pair of pedophiles living around the corner who were abducting 2 and 3 children a day and taking them and sexually abusing them and then releasing them and making them go home. And I would have to listen to these children getting raped 2 and 3 times a day. The whole neighborhood could hear it, except, I don't know how many people actually were at home because, if you go into a suburb in the middle of the day, there's nobody there. There's just about nobody there. But, I was able to stay at home. I was working in my garden, and at the time, I had a goat pen in my suburban backyard. So I was tending to my goats or whatever, and I would literally hear these poor little kids screaming for mummy. It's just it was one of the hardest things I've ever had to go through. And like Tommy Robinson, he tried to report it numerous times to the police. It turned out that the police were protecting them, and that this pedophile cartel that he was looking to expose were, that they were actually funneling children to members of the royal family. And I think that this is full on the scandal that they were looking to, that they wanted everybody standing on the street corners shouting, "Yay, royal family! Yay, hooray, hooray, hooray!" So that everybody wouldn't react in the way that they have reacted now that Tommy Robinson has been arrested. That thousands of British people have gone out on the streets. They swarmed 10 Downing Street. They swarmed Westminster. And if anything bad happens to Tommy Robinson, there's going to be a riot. And because it is a bridge too far. This is the last straw that's breaking the camel's back. And people have got to realize, this pedophile thing's just getting really bad. You can't swing a stick without hitting a pedophile around the district these days. Anywhere. It's just terrible. You can't do anything without sort of having some pedophile being somewhere behind something, And it's mind-boggling.
Is there a connection between politicians and pedophilia? Is there like a defect that these people have?
Absolutely. It's their currency of silence, that they use it to blackmail people into silence. They absolutely do. They use pedophilia to blackmail people into silence, and that's just how it works.
George Bush Jr., former president of the United States, would admit that he was part of a secret society. And when he was asked, so what do you guys do in this secret society? And I'm paraphrasing, he said something like, well, if I told you, it wouldn't be a secret. Do you think that it's possible that these secret societies are involved in pedophilia and they get these guys to do these awful things at a young age? I'm talking about these politicians to be, people who have been slated to become selected for political office. They get them to do these awful things to children, and then that's what they use for blackmail later on when these guys get in office?
Yeah, absolutely. That's fully what they do. And they've been doing it actually for centuries, you know. They really, really have. And it's a lot of these secret societies, it's part of their so-called traditional ceremonies to go out and abuse children and to have human sacrifice and all the rest of it. And there was when the Knights Templar were wiped out by, I think it was Philip IV of France. He basically said, well, you guys are a bunch of Satanists, basically. He said, you worship the devil in your secret societies, and so therefore I'm banning your secret societies and sentencing every one of your, adherents to your secret societies. You can be sentenced all to death and burnt at the stake. You know, it just so happened at the time that the Knights Templar were the bankers in France at the time, and in burning every member of the Knights Templar that he could find, he also conveniently rid himself of all of his government debt and probably any other liabilities that they would have had over him as well. But they were just about wiped out. I think it was Philip IV. It might have been Philip II. So if you look up the Knights Templar and King Philip of France, I think that you'll find which one it is. I think it was Philip IV. Okay.
One of our children says, "Hey, Dad, women, the way politicians and the way royalty look at children, women are for procreation, little boys are for fun. Is there truth to that?"
I don't know. It wouldn't surprise me. I don't know. I grew up in a relatively normal family in the suburbs. Although we were descended from British blue bloods, my dad was a very honourable man. He hated the Freemasons. He absolutely hated them because his uncle was Fred Bennett's, and I told the story about how he had access to Fred Bennett's library for an afternoon when he was a boy, and he read the books, and he was so disgusted by the Freemasonry text that he read that he hated them for life.
Will you share a little bit more about the Freemasons? Can you share more of that when we come back?
Yeah, I think I can.
We'll be right back. About Guineith, you go to usaprepares.com. Guineith Isaacs is listed on the instructors tab on the website. Guineith, quick update on the T-shirts. You're so concerned about freeing Tommy Robinson that you've got some T-shirts ready?
Yes, that's right. The link it's at my Zazzle page, which is www.zazzle.com /Guineith. Okay. But the thing is, I think that it's, there was settings on the back end of the page that were making the T-shirt difficult to find. Okay, I think I've fixed it now. It should be there now, or it should be there later on today. Okay, but if you are having trouble finding the shirt on Zazzle, you can go to my Facebook page and you'll see the T-shirt linked there, and you can get to Zazzle by clicking through on that link. But yeah, I'm not, I'm making probably about $6 on each of these T-shirts. I'm not making a huge amount of money. And my whole Zazzle account in its whole history since 2011 has probably generated about $20 worth of income for me. The thing is to get the T-shirts out the door so that people, because the press is so much clamping down on the whole Tommy Robinson thing that we can't just let his name be forgotten. We can't just let his face be forgotten. He's been an absolute hero with what he's done with standing up against these pedophile cartels who seem to be of the opinion that they can just come in and that they can just take over. And like I say, in many places, quite literally, you can't swing a stick without hitting pedophiles. You go into town, it's impossible to do anything without having to deal with these people. It's just disgusting. The government's full of them. The municipalities full of them. The business communities full of them. And, it's just, it makes your head spin. It really, really does. And, I made these T-shirts because I think I've got to do something so that, so that he's not forgotten, so that people will, so that he just won't disappear into the night, basically, And I thought, well, what could I do? And then I thought, I've got to make T-shirts about this. That was my train of thought. So if people go and they buy one of these T-shirts, and go and wear it, especially if you're a woman, then they can't order you to take it off. That's why it's a woman appearing. That's why. But if you're a man as well, you can go to Apple and you can order it in a man style T-shirt. Okay. Although it's a female model there, but yeah, you become a walking billboard. And I'm going to order a T-shirt, when I can, eventually for myself as well, just to and wear it out when I'm out and about, just to raise awareness that this sort of thing is going on.
Tell us about the back.
It's just disgusting.
Tell us about the back of the T-shirt.
Yep. Okay, the back of the T-shirt has hang together or hang separately with an old woodcut, centuries old, that I found on the internet, of a gallows with a man hanging on it. And that about sums it up. We've got to, we've got to make a stand now, or we're all going to be lost forever. I think this is the end of the broadcast, isn't it?
It is. Guineith, thank you so much for being with us and staying up late for 2 hours. I'll see you next week.